Hey guys, it's Nathan Cole again, and today I'm diving into cruise ship passengers who never made it home. And trust me, after researching these stories, I'm never booking one again. From a guy who rented a beat-up ATV to an engineer who wandered into a ship's engine room with deadly machinery, and it ended in the worst way possible. It was November 7th, 2015, at an unsanctioned ATV rental operation in Cozumel, Mexico. The gravel lot sat roughly a quarter-mile from the cruise ship pier, where vendors lined up to catch passengers looking for last-minute shore excursions. Gerald Fitch had docked that morning with his wife on a 7-night Western Caribbean cruise. They were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary, and friends back home knew Gerald as someone who hated organized group activities. He preferred doing his own thing, even if it meant taking risks that more careful people might avoid. The couple had walked off the ship at 9:15 a.m. with no pre-booked excursion plans. While strolling through the vendor corridor, Gerald was approached by a representative from an unlicensed ATV rental business. The guy offered a self-guided jungle trail route for cash, no formal booking, no enforceable waiver, and no documented safety briefing. I mean, it sounded sketchy, really sketchy. Gerald paid for 2 ATVs without asking any questions about the equipment condition or the trail difficulty. His wife took one look at the vehicles and immediately declined to ride, but Gerald went ahead anyway, even though he had no documented experience operating off-road vehicles. The rental operator gave him a brief verbal overview of the trail route, about 9 miles through inland scrubland, and pointed toward a hand-painted wooden sign marking the entrance. The ATV Gerald received was a mid-size utility model with visible wear on the front brake assembly. Investigators later found that the front brake cable had significant fraying at the lever connection point, but no helmet was offered or provided. The trail crossed 2 paved roads before entering a single-track dirt path that descended through dense scrubland toward the island's less developed interior. Gerald left the rental lot at 9:50 a.m., while his wife waited at a nearby cafe, expecting him back within the advertised 90-minute window. But Gerald never returned. By 11:20 a.m., his wife approached the rental operator, who suggested the trail sometimes ran longer than expected. When noon came and went with no sign of Gerald, she contacted pier security, who relayed her concerns to local authorities. Mexican Transit Police and a pier liaison officer began driving the trail route at 12:34 p.m. About 5.6 miles from the rental lot, the trail descended a moderately steep hillside before bending sharply left at a dry creek crossing. What they found there painted a pretty clear picture of what had happened. Skid marks from the ATV's rear tires began roughly 60 feet above the bend, exactly what you'd expect from someone hitting the brakes hard while going too fast downhill. The front brake lever was found depressed and completely unresponsive. The frayed cable snapped under pressure as Gerald attempted to slow down, with speed and downhill momentum compounding the failure. I've always found it unsettling how investigators can reconstruct someone's final moments just from tire marks and broken equipment. Gerald probably had maybe 3 or 4 seconds to realize his brakes weren't working before he went off that trail. The ATV had left the trail at the sharp bend and traveled about 36 feet down a rocky embankment before slamming into a cluster of limestone boulders. Gerald was found beside the vehicle, unresponsive, with no pulse. Emergency services reached the site at 1:17 p.m. via a service road running parallel to the trail. Gerald was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner documented fatal blunt force trauma to the head and chest, injuries completely consistent with a high-impact collision. The absence of a helmet was noted prominently in the report. The cruise line was notified at 1:45 p.m., but the ship departed Cozumel at 5 p.m., as scheduled. Gerald's wife remained on the island with consular assistance while arrangements were made. Mexican authorities seized the rental operator's remaining vehicles and documented the brake failure. The operator held no tourism license and carried no liability insurance. What gets me about Gerald's case is how preventable it was. Just think about it. Every single warning sign was there. Unlicensed operator, no safety equipment, visibly worn vehicles, no insurance. His wife saw the red flags immediately and refused to participate. But sometimes, especially on vacation, people make decisions they'd never make at home. All right, so this next case really gets under my skin, and it's about a guy who made one terrible decision after a night of heavy drinking. It was July 18th, 2016, on a cruise ship sailing through the Norwegian fjords between Bergen and Flåm. The vessel was cutting through calm waters in the inner fjord corridor at a reduced overnight speed of about 12 knots. Outside, air temperature had dropped to 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and moderate wind came off the fjord walls as most passengers settled in for the night. Raymond Ose, a 44-year-old secondary school principal from Kumasi, Ghana, was traveling alone on this 9-night Norwegian fjords cruise. He'd been saving toward this trip for 3 years, following a difficult divorce. Colleagues back home described Raymond as reserved and disciplined during the school year, but they knew he tended to unwind significantly during holidays, maybe a little too much. This was Raymond's first cruise experience, and he'd booked a mid-range balcony cabin on Deck 7. By the evening of July 18th, the third night at sea, passenger logs and bar transaction records showed Raymond had been drinking heavily across 2 onboard bars between 7 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. Now, here's what bothers me about this whole situation. A bartender later told investigators that Raymond had been friendly and talkative throughout the evening, but by his final order at 11:14 p.m., he was showing visible signs of intoxication. Yet nobody thought to cut him off or suggest he call it a night. Raymond returned to his cabin at 11:40 p.m., according to keycard entry records. The balcony railing on Deck 7 measured about 3.6 feet in height, compliant with international maritime safety standards, but still low enough to be dangerous for someone who'd been drinking heavily. A cabin steward working the Deck 7 corridor that night later reported hearing music from Raymond's cabin around 11:55 p.m., but no sounds of distress. Then, at 12:34 a.m., everything changed. A passenger in the cabin directly above Raymond's on Deck 8 reported hearing a single loud impact against the balcony partition wall below, followed immediately by silence. The passenger waited several minutes, probably thinking it was just someone dropping something, before calling the front desk at 12:41 a.m. Security staff knocked on Raymond's cabin door at 12:47 a.m. and got no response. When they used a master key card to enter, they found the cabin empty and the balcony door wide open. The balcony itself was also empty. Security immediately notified the bridge, and the captain initiated a man overboard protocol at 12:51 a.m. The ship altered course and deployed searchlights across the fjord surface, while a rescue boat was deployed at 1:04 a.m. The Norwegian Coast Guard was contacted and dispatched a patrol vessel from a nearby coastal station. But honestly, I've always wondered if they really had a chance at that point. Water temperature in the fjord that night was recorded at 52 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, cold shock and swimming failure typically occur within 30 minutes for an average adult, significantly less for someone impaired by alcohol. Raymond was located by the rescue boat at 1:38 a.m., about 0.6 miles behind the ship's last confirmed position. He was floating face down and unresponsive. Resuscitation was attempted aboard the rescue boat, but it was too late. Raymond was transferred to the Norwegian Coast Guard vessel and transported to a medical facility in Flåm, where he was formally pronounced dead. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as drowning, with hypothermia as a contributing factor. His blood alcohol content measured post-mortem was 0.19%, more than twice the legal driving limit in most places. Ship investigators reviewed what security footage they had. The cabin's exterior camera only covered the corridor, and relied on the deck's 8-passenger statement and keycard records to reconstruct the timeline. No evidence of third-party involvement was found, and the incident was ruled an accidental fall from the balcony. I'll be honest, this whole thing could have been prevented right from the start. The cruise line's internal review flagged the bar service records and initiated a policy review around alcohol monitoring for solo passengers during extended evening shifts. But that came too late for Raymond, who just wanted to enjoy his hard-earned vacation after years of saving up following his divorce. Now let's see a case where a retired librarian made one crucial mistake that cost her life. This particular story is actually very terrifying. It was April 3, 2014, along a popular shoreline in Nassau, Bahamas. The morning sun warmed the sandy entry points where tourists gathered with snorkel gear, while a moderate offshore wind created a steady surface current moving parallel to the shoreline before gradually angling seaward. Diane Caldwell, a 61-year-old retired librarian from Portland, Oregon, was traveling with her younger sister on a 7-night Eastern Caribbean cruise. Friends and family knew Diane as independent and quietly adventurous, someone who preferred exploring on her own rather than joining organized tours. She was comfortable in the water from years of recreational swimming in lake environments, but she had zero open water ocean experience. She'd only snorkeled once before, about 8 years earlier in a shallow, calm resort lagoon in Hawaii. The cruise ship had docked that morning, and the sisters disembarked with a loose plan for the day. Diane's sister planned to stay near the port area, while Diane decided to snorkel on her own after reading about a nearby reef. She chose to explore independently rather than book a guided excursion. Here's where I think Diane made her first mistake. At about 10:15 a.m., Diane purchased a basic snorkel set, mask, snorkel tube, and fins from a beachside vendor near Cable Beach. The vendor provided absolutely no information about current conditions, which honestly doesn't surprise me. She told her sister she expected to be back at the wharf by 1 p.m. for the ship's 3 p.m. departure. Local conditions that morning included offshore winds, creating a steady surface current, moving at about 1.3 miles per hour parallel to the shoreline, before gradually pulling seaward past a marked boundary. A small warning sign about strong currents was posted near one beach access point, but it was partially obstructed and easy to miss. Diane entered the water at about 10:40 a.m. from a sandy entry point. Her sister later confirmed she hadn't applied sunscreen, a detail investigators used to help estimate her time in the water, and she carried no flotation device beyond the snorkel equipment. For the first 20 to 30 minutes, Diane snorkeled along the reef section without any problems, staying within what seemed like a reasonable distance from shore. But two tourists from a separate cruise line who were on the beach later told investigators they noticed a lone snorkeler gradually moving westward along the bay at a pace that looked inconsistent with active swimming. And this is the part that really gets me. They said it looked like she was drifting with the current rather than swimming purposefully, but neither of them reported it at the time. They just assumed she knew what she was doing and would exit the water somewhere else along the shoreline. The offshore current beyond the western buoy line was running at about 1.3 miles per hour that morning, according to regional maritime records. Once a swimmer crosses that buoy line, the current angles away from shore at a widening angle. The scary part is, the transition is so gradual that someone focused on looking at fish and coral might not immediately notice they're being carried away from shore. By about 11:30 a.m., the two beach witnesses had lost sight of the snorkeler completely. Again, they didn't think much of it. Diane's sister arrived at their agreed meeting point near the wharf at 1:10 p.m. and found no sign of her. After waiting 25 minutes, probably getting more worried by the minute, she contacted cruise ship staff who relayed the concern to Bahamian port authorities at 1:48 p.m. A search was launched at 2:15 p.m. and the cruise ship delayed departure by 90 minutes. Diane was located at 4:44 p.m. by the patrol vessel about 2.4 miles offshore from her entry point. She was floating face down, and her snorkel mask had become dislodged. Resuscitation was attempted aboard the patrol vessel, but she was already gone. When I first read that she was found about 2.4 miles offshore, I had to double-check the numbers. That's a significant distance from where she entered the water, just from slow, steady current drift that she probably never even felt happening while she was focused on the reef below. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as drowning. No evidence of cardiac events or any prior medical episode was found. Investigators concluded the offshore current had carried her beyond swimming range of shore so gradually that the drift went unnoticed until her ability to return was already compromised. Diane's sister departed Nassau 2 days later following consular assistance with documentation. The cruise line later issued internal guidance reminding port staff to provide independent excursion passengers with current condition advisories before disembarkation at high-risk shoreline destinations. But again, that came too late for Diane. All right, we're getting close to the end here. And if these stories are messing with your head like they are with mine, hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more of these cases that'll keep you up at night. This next case absolutely terrifies me, and it's about someone whose confidence ended up leading him into the most dangerous place possible on a cruise ship. It was March 2nd, 2017, on a cruise ship sailing between islands in the Eastern Caribbean. The ship was moving through open water during the overnight hours, while most passengers slept in their cabins. Below deck, the vessel's massive propulsion systems operated continuously, with rotating drive shaft components running at sustained speed within designated guard housings. Otto Brennan, a 47-year-old mechanical engineer from Dublin, Ireland, was traveling with a group of 4 colleagues on a 10-night Southern Caribbean cruise. They'd organized the trip as a retirement send-off for a mutual friend. Colleagues described Otto as professionally confident and completely comfortable around large machinery, which, as it turned out, directly contributed to the decision-making that would cost him his life. The group had attended a farewell dinner in the main dining hall that evening before moving to an upper-deck bar. By 11 p.m., most of them had returned to their cabins, but Otto stayed at the bar until about 12:10 a.m., according to transaction records. During dinner, colleagues later told investigators Otto had mentioned wanting to see the ship's engine room before the cruise ended. Nobody took the comments seriously at the time. Now, I think Otto's familiarity with industrial environments made him overconfident about navigating spaces he had no business being in. At 12:22 a.m., Otto's keycard was used to enter his cabin on Deck 5. However, just 9 minutes later, a crew corridor access door on the same deck was recorded as opened. The door was located about 100 feet forward of his cabin and marked with a crew-only placard. It used a magnetic latch that should have been secured but was left improperly fastened, something investigators later flagged as a serious compliance gap. The crew corridor beyond that door connected to a descending stairwell leading through decks 4, 3, and 2 toward the vessel's engine room access passage. The route was used exclusively by engineering crew during maintenance rotations. Because of a scheduled maintenance overlap, crew presence in that section was limited between midnight and 4 a.m., leaving parts of the lower passage intermittently unmonitored. CCTV footage from the crew corridor showed Otto moving through the passage at 12:33 a.m. He moved deliberately and without hesitation, definitely not someone who was lost or confused. He descended the stairwell toward Deck 2 at 12:36 a.m. and passed through a fire door that had been left unsecured into the engine room access passage. What gets me about watching that footage is how confident Otto looked. This wasn't some drunk passenger stumbling around lost. He knew exactly where he was going and what he wanted to see. His engineering background probably made him feel like he belonged down there. What Otto found down there was a nightmare waiting to happen. The engine room access passage ran alongside the primary and secondary propulsion systems behind a steel partition. A hinged inspection hatch in the partition had been left unlatched following an earlier maintenance check that evening. The primary propulsion system operated continuously at sea, with rotating drive shaft components running at sustained speed. One secondary shaft coupling assembly on the port side had its guard panel partially removed during earlier maintenance. It was supposed to be replaced during a parts delivery scheduled for the Barbados port stop. Evidence showed Otto had opened the inspection hatch and reached toward an exposed rotating assembly operating at full speed. His arm was caught and pulled into the moving components, resulting in immediate fatal injury. An engineering crew member later discovered the open hatch and alerted the bridge. The affected machinery was shut down, and senior crew entered the space where Otto was found. The ship's medical officer confirmed death shortly after. The vessel then diverted to its next port under reduced speed. The medical examiner documented injuries consistent with entanglement in a rotating mechanical assembly. I won't go into details, but it was a lot. The investigation cited multiple safety failures, including an improperly secured access point and exposed machinery, which together created a path into a dangerous area. The cruise operator was required to review access controls and maintenance protocols across its fleet. Otto's decision to enter a restricted space, combined with these failures, led to the incident. So this final case really gets to me, and it's about how being curious can actually put you in serious danger when you end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was January 14th, 2018, on a cruise ship sailing between Europe and North America. This was a 14-night transatlantic repositioning cruise, one of those discounted routes that moves ships from their European winter schedule to spring Caribbean deployment. The vessel was about 600 nautical miles west of Ireland in the North Atlantic, with outside air temperature at 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Felicia Drummond, a 39-year-old event caterer from Bristol, England, was traveling alone on this repositioning cruise. She worked in catering and had a natural comfort around commercial kitchen environments which, as you'll see, became directly relevant to what happened next. Family described Felicia as resourceful and socially confident, someone who befriended service staff easily wherever she traveled. What really gets to me about repositioning cruises is how empty they feel compared to regular sailings. With far fewer passengers on board, staffing is reduced, large sections sit unused, and the ship just doesn't operate at full capacity. Felicia had quickly befriended 2 kitchen staff members during the first 2 days of the voyage. She regularly visited the crew cafe adjacent to the main galley during off-peak hours, and crew members later told investigators she was genuinely curious about the ship's food operation. On the evening of January 13th, she'd been shown around the outer sections of the main galley informally. Now, I've always found it interesting how people's professional backgrounds can make them feel more comfortable in environments they shouldn't really be in. Felicia's catering experience probably made the ship's kitchen areas feel familiar and safe to her. On January 14th, by early afternoon, most passengers had retreated indoors due to the cold. At about 2:15 p.m., CCTV showed Felicia entering the crew access corridor adjacent to the main galley on Deck 3. Investigators concluded she was returning to the crew cafe area, a route she'd used informally the previous evening. The crew member who had shown her around was off shift and asleep in crew quarters. The main galley's cold storage annex opened directly off the crew corridor through a heavy insulated door. Here's the crucial detail that makes this whole thing so tragic. The door handle on the interior side had been reported as stiff and difficult to operate 3 days before departure. A maintenance work order had been logged but never completed before sailing. From the outside, the door opened and closed normally, so nobody thought it was urgent. CCTV footage from the crew corridor showed Felicia pausing at the cold storage door at 2:19 p.m. She pulled it open and stepped inside, probably just curious about the food storage operation. The door swung closed behind her with what looked like a normal, gentle motion. I've watched a lot of security footage for these cases, but there's something particularly haunting about seeing someone walk through a door so casually, not knowing they're walking into what's essentially going to become their tomb. Inside the annex, Felicia entered an immediately dangerous environment. The space was maintained at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, with tightly packed shelving creating narrow, low-visibility corridors. At that temperature, an unprotected person can begin experiencing serious physical impairment within 10 to 15 minutes, including disorientation and loss of motor control. CCTV from inside the annex, a single fixed camera near the door, showed Felicia attempting to operate the interior door handle. The motion looked slower than it should have, requiring sustained grip strength and precise lateral movement to disengage the mechanism. In rapidly dropping body temperature, grip strength deteriorates quickly. The footage showed her trying the handle repeatedly over about 9 minutes, with her movements becoming progressively slower and less coordinated. At 2:31 p.m., she moved deeper into the shelving rows, likely seeking insulation between the stacked provisions. She never returned to the door. The galley operated with reduced staffing that afternoon, and no one accessed the cold storage during that window, so Felicia's absence went unnoticed. At 6:40 p.m., a supervisor entered to retrieve provisions and found her unresponsive between the shelving rows, then immediately alerted the medical team. The ship's medical officer reached the annex at 6:44 p.m. and confirmed death. Core body temperature at discovery was consistent with fatal hypothermia following extended exposure. Time of death was estimated between 2:45 p.m. and 3:15 p.m., meaning she likely succumbed within 25 to 30 minutes of being trapped inside. What stands out to me is how a simple maintenance request, fixing a stiff door handle, could have saved her life. It was logged 3 days before departure, but nobody prioritized it because the door worked fine from the outside. Equipment analysis confirmed the door's primary system functioned, but the interior handle required force and precise movement that became difficult under rapidly dropping body temperature. The incident was linked to the unresolved interior handle issue. The investigation cited the unresolved handle issue and gaps in safety protocols during reduced staffing operations. What absolutely breaks my heart about Felicia's case is how she died alone in that freezing compartment, probably panicking as she realized she couldn't get out. The cruise operator was issued mandatory compliance findings requiring interior emergency releases on all cold storage units before their next scheduled sailing, but that came 4.5 hours too late for Felicia.